Hello, and welcome to this week's True Crime live stream. If you don't know who I am, hi, I'm FEARSONA. You can call me Fear, you can call me Sona, and I'm your friendly neighborhood true crime VTuber, here to give you full body chills. And today, we're gonna talk about one of the probably most known, most famous Halloween mysteries. Because it is the mystery of Edgar Allan Poe's death. Also, why am I... I just realized my chat box is like weird. Okay. As always, I have to like fix it up. Okay. First, before we begin, I just wanted to give my thanks to Kanta because he helped me out with research and that was a lot. It was a lot and I loved Kanta's little comments, little notes in the in the sources, in the materials. I'm gonna talk about it, but like it was I laughed a lot reading those. Okay, and hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I assume that you guys have heard the name Edgar Allan Poe. Most of you likely know that he was an American poet, a writer, and most of us probably associate him with anything dark, grotesque, melancholic, all of those. I don't know, like usually the stereotype is like, oh, depressed, like Poe, like Edgar Allan Poe. Like you just think about like, oh, this sad person. Yeah, he was sad. We heard it in school. We see a lot of his work referenced in modern media because Edgar Allan Poe is dubbed as the father of modern mystery and macabre, a central figure in American Romanticism, and a pioneer paving the genre of science fiction even. But what schools don't really teach us or don't really like get into details is the true mystery behind Edgar Allan Poe's death. And today, that's exactly what I'm gonna talk about. That's exactly what I'm gonna tell you. This is the story. Okay, yeah, I messed up my own screen. Okay, excuse me. This was a fail. I was supposed to show the first slide and then I switched to to the chat room. Ouch. Okay, great. Congrats. This wouldn't be my stream if there weren't some like technical difficulties. Yes. All right. So this is the story of Edgar Allan Poe's death. So Poe was what is stereotypically known as a starving artist. No, like, I mean, really. He, although he became quite well known in the 1800s and was making a living off of his writing alone, that wasn't much, and Poe struggled a lot financially throughout his life. When he was 2, his mother passed away shortly after his father abandoned the family, and then he, an orphan, was taken in by a couple in Richmond, Virginia. The couple was named John and Frances Allan. Even though they never formally adopted him, they took him in, they took care of him. He first attended the University of Virginia, but left when he ran out of tuition money due to his gambling addiction. And then later he enlisted in the US Army, where he actually published his first work, which is called Tamerlane and the Other Poems. I apologize if I mispronounced this title. I was Tamerlane. I was trying to like figure it out, but like I'm probably mispronouncing it. I apologize. So he actually wrote this work under a pen name, a Bostonian. Poe left the army around 18. Oh Jesus! I keep wanting to read it as 1929, but he left the army around 1829 because he wanted to be a full-time writer and poet and not a soldier. For the next several years, he polished his writing skills, working at like magazines, journals, and periodicals, moving often from city to city between Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York City, until he met his future wife, Virginia Clem, who was, by the way, his cousin, who was, by the way, 13 years old at the time. Ew. I mean, I know this was probably like normal in the 1800s, but ew. Goddamn, you had to be a creep. Like, he actually obtained like a legal license to marry her when she was 13 years old. I mean, I know I shouldn't be thinking about this in like through modern standards, because this was 1800s and it's just like, okay, you know, this was normal, quote unquote normal, but still ew. Why? No, don't do that. Why would you? Oh my lord. But yeah, he married her at 13. And then 2 years after Poe, published his 2 years after he married Virginia, he published his probably most well-known poem, The Raven. And Virginia then died of tuberculosis in 1847. I keep reading it as 1947. Also, I'm sorry, he married Virginia in 1835, and then 10 years later, I don't know why I said 2 years later. 2 years later, like Virginia died, but he published The Raven in 1845, and then Virginia dies in 1847. Poe's career took off from The Raven, and he was planning to publish more of his works, like The Pen, or later known as The Stylus. But before he could achieve more, he died unexpectedly on October 7th, 1849, at the young age of 40, and his death can only be called a puzzling mystery to this very day. So, on October 3rd, 1849, a man named Joseph W. Walker, and remember this. Well, remember the name Joseph. We're gonna hear a lot of Josephs and Johns, because clearly they didn't have other names. I don't know, like the 1800s, very unoriginal. Everyone was fucking named John and Joseph. Okay, so this man, this man named Joseph W. Walker was walking down the street in Baltimore, and as he was passing by a tavern that was recently being used as a polling place, so for elections, he noticed a disheveled man lying in stupor in the road next to the establishment. He described the man as, the man being, quote, in great distress and in need of immediate assistance, end quote. The man's clothes were in a terrible state, but the man seemed coherent enough to talk to Joseph Walker. Jeez, I keep messing it up. Like, I'm just like thinking John or Joseph, and I'm just gonna mix it up. You know what? Fuck it. It was the same. So doesn't matter. So Walker talked to him briefly, and when the man talked to him, he requested that Walker send a letter to a friend of the man by the name Joseph E. Snodgrass. Yes, another Joseph, because why would we be original? I can't speak today. And I love how Kanta here added a little note that said, somehow a real name, Snodgrass. So, by some fucking, I don't know. Don't make it not make sense. Okay, so obviously this man, which later we know that it was Edgar Allan Poe, but he told Walker to send this letter to his friend Joseph E. Snodgrass, and the letter read, quote, Baltimore City, October 3rd, 1849. Dear Sir, there's a gentleman rather the worse for wear at Ryan's Fourth Ward polls, who goes under the cognomen of Edgar A. Poe, and who appears in great distress. He says that he is acquainted with you, and I assure you he is in need of immediate assistance. Yours in haste, Joseph W. Walker, to Dr. J. E. Snodgrass. End quote. I don't know why, but I do love the expression yours in haste. Make haste! Or in modern language, hurry the fuck up, because your friend is dying. Okay, so Edgar Allan Poe was then admitted to Washington Medical College Hospital and was under the care of Dr. John Joseph Moran. Holy shit, how many Johns and Josephs? More Johns and Josephs into the mix, because there was a serious lack of names in the 1800s, clearly. I will probably just refer to all these NPCs by their surnames because it's fucking confusing. Also, thank you so much, Cesario, for your donation. Oh, cool. This should go nicely with Hollywood Graveyard's documentary on Poe and the women in his life a few weeks ago when I do the replay. Oh boy, Poe and his women. There were a lot. And also it was some of them were very, very questionable. Okay. But moving on. So, as I said, Poe was admitted to Washington Medical College, and then he was treated by this Dr. John Joseph Moran, or Moran. I don't know. Honestly, could be a moron because he was... it's another questionable person. Okay, so by that point, Poe was coherent enough to explain the circumstances that led to... wasn't coherent enough to explain, what happened to him, like the circumstances that led to his current state. He was placed in the part of the hospital, the wing that treated drunks, and the conditions that in that wing were, questionable. Because people just didn't care about drunks. They just, they just didn't treat them very well. So Dr. Snodgrass, Poe's friend, was likely the only one outside of the hospital to visit Poe during his final days during this time, because strangely, and I don't know why, shortly after Poe was admitted, no visitors would be allowed to see him, and not even family. Like, suddenly they were just banned, even though technically Poe was placed in the ward that was for drunks. So, like, for people who were just, sobering up, I don't know, or had alcohol poisoning. I don't think that was an infectious disease, and yet, suddenly the visitors were just banned. So then, by Snodgrass's own account, I can't say this name with a straight face, Snodgrass. I don't know why. Oh, by the way, this is spelled Snodgrass, not snot. It's Snot. Okay, so Snodgrass's account was that Poe was in a terrible state. He was wearing clothes that weren't actually his, and they weren't even his size and were very, very worn down. Poe was in either unconscious or delirious state, and barely strong enough to speak. Yet his attending doctor, John, whatever the fuck his name was, but Dr. Moran later made claims about various things that Poe allegedly said during his time in the hospital. Most were unreliable and impossible to confirm. Nurses, on the other hand, said that Poe was too worn out, and whenever he did try to speak, his voice was too soft and made no sense, or no one was able to make anything out. So, then the doctor was saying, oh yeah, he totally said some things, and I know all of those things, so believe me. But I'm gonna explain why this cannot be confirmed and why, we don't know to this day, what was actually happening to him. So 4 days later, supposedly at 5 a.m. on October 7th, 1949, Edgar Allan Poe passed away. Even the day the date and time of his death aren't exactly 100% confirmed, because somehow all of Poe's relevant medical records have been lost to this day, missing, along with his death certificate. So we actually don't know. This is like the most, I guess, the most frequently mentioned date, like October 7th, not 1949, Jesus, 1849. What am I talking about? I keep reading it as 1949. But yeah, October 7th, 1849 is the date that was, that is considered the correct date of his death. Time, I don't know. Some say 5 a.m., some say later in the evening. It was weird. Like, his medical records just went poof. So the cause of death was said to be swelling of the brain from an illness today called encephalitis. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Don't come for me. It's fine. Forgive me. Okay, so newspapers reported his death to be due to, quote, congestion of the brain, end quote, or, quote, cerebral inflammation, end quote, which were really fancy terms for death from alcoholism, from alcohol poisoning. But all of those reported causes were never confirmed, since, the documents were lost and no one's ever seen them. Besides like the doctors, I guess, but then it was also questionable. So Poe's cause of death remains a mystery to this day, like the real cause of death, with many theories speculating various conditions like heart disease, delirium tremens, or epilepsy, syphilis, cholera, carbon monoxide poisoning, and even rabies. Like, there's like theory that he had rabies. A theory that emerged in 1872 indicated that Edgar Allan Poe was involved in some electoral fraud, which was called Cooping, and I'm gonna talk about it, where people were basically forced to vote for a particular candidate over and over again. It makes sense. Like, it's a whole kind of fraud operation. But yeah, like, that this theory says that he was involved in this incident, and then he was like beaten up and to death basically, and murdered. Him being involved in such incident was never confirmed. There's only speculations. Okay, but before we explore more of the theories revolving around Poe's death, let's look into some of the characters significant to the story. So first, we have Dr. John Joseph Moran, or Moran, I don't know. The medical practitioner believed to be the only person with continuous access to Poe in his last few days at the hospital. So Moran, I keep like messing it up, but like Moran, I'm gonna just go with Moran, and you can I don't know, you can be angry, you can pronounce it however you want. So Moran made various claims about Poe's state during that time, about the things the writer said. According to his own accounts, whenever Poe was coherent, he would either make off with single words or names, but some other times he would have full coherent sentences, such as a wish for any possible friends that visited him to end his misery. He was asking for family, he was asking for friends, but then he was asking, okay, let them end my misery, just, let me go. Now, the problem was that if Poe could engage in conversation at times, why couldn't he have answered any questions about how he got into the state he was in? Why did the doctor not, ask those questions? Granted, Moran could have theoretically failed to ask any of these questions, but why wouldn't he do so when, the patient was on the brink of death and little was known how he ended up in that state? And, usually doctors try their best to find out, like what led to your state, because they have to treat you and they need that information. So another issue with like Moran in general was his account of how Poe actually died, because the story changes multiple times over the years. He would actually change the date when Poe was admitted to the hospital multiple times again, sometimes even saying that Poe was brought to the hospital in the evening of October 7th, which would be several hours after his actual official date, like the date of death. Time of death. Date and time of death. Okay, so Moran also reported that in his delirious state, Poe would constantly call out the name Reynolds. But there wasn't such a person known to be acquainted with Edgar Allan Poe. It could have been another writer that maybe Poe admired, or it could have been this random person at the pub, at the polling place, complete stranger, or, something. But then Moran would change the story again, and he would say, oh, it actually wasn't Reynolds. He was calling the name Herring, which would be the surname of Poe's relative, Henry Herring. And Henry was Poe's uncle, who actually paid Poe's hospital bill, and it's not unlikely that, Edgar Allan Poe had him in mind while calling out the name. But again, Moran kept changing the story again and again and again. And, even in the letters he had sent to the Herring family, he did write about the name Reynolds. But then, which one was it? Like, he kept changing it. He was just like, oh no, it wasn't this one. It was the other one. He was actually calling out for Herring. So while the doctor might not have had anything to do with Poe's death per se, and he was just a physician who happened to be treating the poet, in his final days, he may have been overly romanticizing Poe's death for fame and clout. I mean, after all that's happened, Poe had become fairly popular and successful, especially after The Raven. And then, after the death, everyone was intrigued by the poet, by his work, by the story. And Moran made use of that. So Moran actually admired him as, as an aspiring fiction writer himself, who would have thought. So maybe he just wanted Poe to, kind of as a way to promote himself and his work, and as a way to step a foot into the literary world. So after Poe's death, Moran was known to go on tours and give lectures about the writer's final days and death. And during those lectures, he would spice the story up. He would gradually add more and more to the story and change everything, and he would profit off of it directly. So while it's okay that he was maybe he wanted to talk about the final days of Poe because he wanted people to know, he wanted to spread the information, that's okay. But then he would mix it up so much that the story became so muddied, so cloudy, foggy and hella confusing. No one actually knew. Even to this day, some argue about the date of his death, the date when Poe was brought to the hospital, because no one is sure, because there's so many accounts. Okay, so another interesting fact is that an autopsy was likely never done on Poe. Well, I mean, we don't know, since as I mentioned before, many assumed that he was, an alcoholic and died of alcohol poisoning. And again, we can't confirm it because the medical records are missing, and it is unlikely they will ever be found. And next up, as Kanta commented in the notes, and I'm gonna quote this because it's, I cannot not quote it. Quote, however, where these documents couldn't be found, this next asshole would take it upon himself to make use of this information vacuum. End quote. Kind of great commentary, by the way, in the in the materials, in the sources. Okay, so the next person we have on the list, on our list, is Rufus Wilmot Griswold. God damn, even his name sounds like an asshole. So Poe and Griswold met when they both worked as editors at a magazine. And let's just say they did not become besties. They were both jealous motherfuckers. Poe became upset when Griswold was hired at a higher pay, and that's how the whole rivalry, like anime rivalry, started. And then they wanted to court the same woman. Oh, that ain't good. That's not good. You know, things are about to go south when there's like K-drama love triangle involved. And this girl was also a poet. This couldn't get any worse. So the girl was called Frances Osgood, a beautiful young woman, a talented, aspiring poet. My goodness, that's terrible. That's fucking terrible. That's a recipe for a disaster. Just by the way, like, I'm just kidding about like if she was beautiful or I mean, I guess she was like fairly attractive. I don't know if she was a brilliant poet. That I don't know. I didn't look it up. So I don't know. She wasn't that hot. I think she wasn't. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Okay, so who am I to judge? Well, the game was afoot because Poe and Griswold were competing for Frances, and it seemed like Poe was actually doing a better job, which pissed Griswold off so much, even more. Oh my god, he was like, I'ma destroy you. So considering their, shoujo anime backstory, it was extremely suspicious that after Poe's death, and just, buckle up because this is fucking great. So after Poe's death, Griswold just popped right in, right out of nowhere, and claimed to be the executor of Poe's works. Like, the hell you are. So he had the audacity to go to Edgar Allan Poe's family and tell them that this, this very, very moving and very, very unlikely story. Like, he would be telling them this, this emotional, very, very unlikely story about how Edgar Allan Poe wanted his lifelong nemesis to publish and gain money from Poe's life work. Sure, Jan. Definitely what happened. So moreover, sometime after Poe's death, Poe's biography, or what's called the Ludwig, I guess, I don't know how to pronounce it, Ludwig? I guess Ludwig. I would just pronounce it like in Polish, I would just say Ludwig. But let's just say Ludwig. Obituary was actually, published and by this guy named Ludwig, or whatever, the pseudonym. And the author claimed that Poe was this maniac, alcoholic, and drug user that would haunt the streets rambling madly, and that his death was nothing more than one of these nights gone too far. He was a drunk. Except, gasp, it turns out that Ludwig was actually none other but this motherfucker, Rufus Griswold. And he wrote all of that crap about Poe. Color me shocked. So Griswold got to not only be the executor of Poe's work, but also was the final voice painting a completely distorted image of who Poe was as a person. And, basically he was trying to tarnish his reputation post-mortem. Like, god damn, calm down, he dead. Like, that's it. You got his work. Can you, not? Like, can you just lay off? At least don't say shit about him. Just, whatever. Profit off of his work if you... It's still messed up. Still, you shouldn't do that shit. Still, just... what? I don't know. No words. So, Poe's family and friends tried to fight these claims, but it was basically too late. The public had already bought into Griswold's story, and whether because they just loved the drama and the idea of a famous writer being a twisted person, or they loved the thought of Poe's personal macabre and darkness bleeding into his works and vice versa. Juicy gossip is all it was. So the notion of Poe being an unhinged lunatic persists to this day in many people's beliefs. I suppose if it's any consolation, it is said that when Griswold fell ill with tuberculosis, karma bitch, on his deathbed, he was staring at 3 portraits. His own, not surprising, Frances, the woman he loved, and Poe, the man he slandered for profit, his biggest rival. And then in his desk, several letters were found that meant to ruin other authors that he didn't like because, the human garbage can he is. He wanted, he was a jealous, greedy bastard, and he just wanted to ruin other authors so that he's the only one. Make them see. I don't know. Oh, I'm gonna sneeze. Oh, why do I have to sneeze now? Okay, maybe not. So, thankfully, a friend of Griswold's found the letters and burned them before they fell into the wrong hands. Rufus Wilmot Griswold was buried without a headstone and was pretty much forgotten besides this, little anecdote. I don't know, fuck you, Rufus. That's my final word. That's what you get. You don't get a headstone. Okay. And now we're gonna move on to the mostly speculated or most likely theories about Poe's death. So theory number 1 is alcohol. The mostly prevailing theory, and while it wasn't as extreme as in Griswold's accounts, Poe was in fact a drinker. However, his alcohol tolerance was very, very low whenever he did indulge a drink, but otherwise he could and would go on for long periods of time without drinking a drop of alcohol, and that was like months, weeks, months he could go without alcohol. His friends, family, and work colleagues all agreed that Poe was mostly a social drinker and would maybe have an occasional drink if he felt depressed. Whenever that happened, he would be intoxicated very, very quickly. He would get sick, and then he would swear off alcohol for months at the least. His father, the father who left the family, and Poe's own brother were both alcoholics. So even if Poe had some genetic predispositions to be tempted by alcohol, he was also trying to fight off the urge to, not be like them, not be an alcoholic. It was also his, at the time, fiance's later wife, Virginia's wish that when he, when they were going to marry, he should cut down on alcohol. He shouldn't drink. That was basically her condition. Okay, only then she would agree to marry him. And I'm trying hard to ignore the fact that she was 13 at the time, because I know that was a norm back in the day, but goddamn. So still upsetting. Okay, so there was a study sometime in 2000, in the early 2000s, on a hair sample from Poe's body, after death, obviously, which found that he very, very well might have kept his promise. So had he been a heavy drinker, I don't know why I messed it up so bad, but had he been a heavy drinker, there would be still some indicators of heavy metals from alcohol in his hair, in his DNA sample, but there weren't any, or at least, it was the early 2000s. I don't know, maybe the testing wasn't that good. Nevertheless, we can't be sure if he maybe had abstained up until the time of his death, and that night on October 3rd, 1849, he got drunk and he died, and the test can also be inaccurate, so who knows. An argument in favor of this theory is the story of a family member that they gave years after Poe's death. And they said that one of Poe's doctors warned him sometime before his death. They warned him that the writer, before his trip from Richmond to New York City, that another bout of drinking could prove fatal to Poe. And allegedly, Poe replied that the doctor wouldn't have to be concerned if people didn't tempt him to drink. And again, he was a social drinker, so this made sense. This alleged response of Poe's to his doctor made sense. I mean, he was a social drinker. So this suggests that maybe Poe met someone that night who just continuously spurred him to drink more and more, but no such witness ever came forward. So that's the only thing we know. That's the only account from the family member that we know, quote unquote, because we don't know if that's even true. And then we have the second theory, which I think is possible. I don't know. I mean, I kind of lean towards that theory and then another one. But let me just go over the second theory. So the second theory talks about cooping. And I mentioned it already. So there's this speculation that Poe might have fallen a victim of cooping, which is an old practice of a gang taking an unsuspecting victim hostage and then forcing them to vote for a particular party or political candidate over and over again by dressing up in various disguises and giving them fake IDs to be able to vote repeatedly. The victim would often be beaten or murdered and ditched somewhere random afterwards. If you remember, Poe was found half passed out in front of a tavern that was also a polling location in Baltimore, and he was wearing messed up clothes that didn't fit him, and they were not his. So, moreover, this particular location was known for cooping, and many believe that one of such cooping gangs, I just burped into the microphone. Great, congrats to me. I don't know if you guys heard it. I apologize. Okay, so many people believe that one of such cooping gangs had taken Poe and made use of him. This theory is also supported by the fact that a very common practice was that at the polling location, with each vote, the caster would be given a free drink. So a man voting in the 1800s would get drunk. Well, I mean, okay, it was one drink, but if he was involved in cooping, just imagine, every time you go, you get a drink over and over. You don't have to pay for it. You just get it for free. And you're technically a different person each time. So, voting in the 1800s. Hell of a party. You get one drink, one free drink, but what is that? The polling place is also a tavern? Well, boys, the night is young. Here's to democracy, am I right? So basically, yeah, also that's another thing. The tavern was, the polling place was the tavern. So it's not even about getting that one free drink. No, you can actually okay, you voted, but you decided, okay, I mean, it's a tavern, I can just stay and drink some more because they have more. And I'm just gonna pay. That said, it is very likely that Poe, being disguised to vote several times, was given a drink over and over again. And because he was a social drinker and would only drink if tempted or pressured to, he could have gotten extremely intoxicated, and he was very weak to alcohol. So by that time, if he had gone, several times, he would have gotten extremely intoxicated, and then, I don't know, passed out. The cons or loose ends of this theory are rather minor and don't really rule the scenario out completely. So while it's common that the gang would steal a person's possessions and clothes, Poe may not have had all of his things stolen. I love how Demon Taker is posting a bunch of beer emojis. Party. It's voting day. Vote till you drop. Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so as I said, that time, Poe may not have had all of his things stolen. So, it is said that he had been found with his sword cane, which, how fucking cool is that? A sword and a cane in one. Like, why is this not common now? I need this in my life. Like, how cool does that work? Obviously, this is not the sword cane. This is just, like, this is not Poe's sword cane or sword stick. That's just an example. Why do I not have a sword cane? Not sure what I would do with it, but I want one. So he was found with this sword cane, and I will never get tired of saying sword cane, in his hands, and a couple other items of his, including some form of ID that helped the witness Joseph Walker, or John. I forgot. Honestly, I fucking forgot because there were so many of them. I mean, same thing. Never mind. So he had some form of identification that helped, Walker and the hospital to identify Edgar Allan Poe. However, the sword cane, it's fucking awesome. And those other items allegedly found on him are never mentioned beyond anecdotes years later. There's no documentation or police reports that would confirm that Poe had them on himself, but how cool would that be? Like, come on. So this kind of questionable like fact or questionable part is, had Poe had that sword cane, ergo a weapon, because it is a weapon, perhaps he would have been able to fight the Cooping gang. Maybe he would have driven them away from himself. Although it's not impossible that the gang initially actually convinced him to cooperate with a job offer or a meal or a drink or whatever it was that tempted him. And, it was just like, first it was a cooperation approach. So the following is actually a story of another person who was cooped, and it sounds very similar to this scenario. So let me read that. Quote, Cooping victim J. Justice Ritzman was looking for a laboring gig when he was lured by Cooping campaigners during the 1859 presidential election in Baltimore, Maryland, which was later examined in a lengthy congressional hearing on the fraud. A member of the Pug Ugly street gang, Pug Ugly? What is this? Like Coyote Ugly? What is that? Okay, but cool name. So a member of the Pug Ugly street gang offered Ritzman and other men a job and then brought them to a bar. When fully drunk, they were led into a warehouse where they came in front of a crowd of men, about 5 or 6, armed with clubs and guns and other weapons, according to Ritzman's testimony in court in 1860. I was going to say 1816. The men were robbed and left in a dark basement where they were given voting tickets for the Democratic candidate. He and the others voted 16 times that day. Holy shit. Peter Fitzpatrick, another Cooping victim, said the gang dealt me 2 blows with a billy on the head and 2 on the knees to make me drink liquor. And after they compelled me to drink, on voting day, they and almost 80 other men were forced to one polling booth after another, changing jackets and hats between stops as a disguise. The treatment of some of those in the coop was disgusting and horrible in the extreme. Men were beaten, kicked, and stamped in the face with heavy boots, said Ritzman. So that was the election fraud in the 1800s. So again, this involved obviously kidnapping, forced drinking, beating. This sounds familiar. Like, what? We don't actually know what happened to Poe, but like, hey, first they were lured, and Poe could have been lured to actually join this Cooping operation with like the promise of money, promise of a meal, whatever, promise of something that he wanted, and then they actually beat him up. So the only other argument against this theory is that Poe had already been known and famous in the area. And, as a writer, as a poet, he was a celebrity. somewhat celebrity in the literary world, I can't speak, which renders him quite a terrible Cooping candidate. I mean, if he is famous, like, it's easy for people to recognize him. He would have been recognized, during the Cooping operation, and had that happened, it would have certainly backfired at the gang as well as the at the operation, and it would have been just terrible for them. And obviously the operation would be over. But it is possible that the gang had no clue who Poe was to begin with, and, when they ambushed him, and simply, they got lucky when he was not recognized while voting, which is risky, but not impossible. Okay. So, on to the next theory, which is the murder. A very straightforward theory about foul play being involved in Edgar Allan Poe's demise. Whether or not he was drunk that night, he may have come across the wrong person and was essentially beaten to death. Whether it was a robbery or an attack by someone he knew is the big mystery. So part of this theory is that Poe could have been beaten and murdered by the brothers of his then fiance. Yes, another fiance, because his wife is dead. He had like a couple of fiancés. So there was this fiance called Elmira Shelton. I don't know how to read it. Elmira? I'm just gonna go with Elmira. So Elmira Shelton, she came from a wealthy family, and it is known that she was hesitant to marry Poe. She eventually agreed, but some say it angered Elmira's brothers because they thought that Poe was nothing more but a gold digger, and he was just, looking to marry Elmira for money, for fame, for, the status. Years after Poe's death, a writer came forward. The writer was named John Evangelist Walsh. Seriously, were there no other names? Okay, but John, again, another. So Walsh offered a theory based on anecdotes and letters that maybe Elmira's brothers had found Poe on his trip to Baltimore, because he was going from Richmond to New York. And then they threatened Poe to the point where he was hiding his identity with a disguise to avoid the brothers. So that's why he was like dressed in weird clothes that didn't really fit him. But they eventually, like, he was trying to hide from them so that they don't get him, and, they stopped like threatening him. But they eventually did find him and basically beat him to near death at the time. But then he later obviously died. Following, they could have forced him to drink alcohol in order to make him look like a drunk, and beat him more to the point when he died of trauma caused by brain swelling days later. So while the theory is, possible, many find it unlikely because Elmira's brothers had plenty of other options to get rid of Poe. I mean, the family was wealthy. I'm pretty sure they could have covered it up. Also, it didn't make sense for them to, like, if they wanted to get rid of him, it didn't make sense for them to just let him live. Because then Poe would say something about it. I mean, he is a writer and he is a celebrity, and this would be a scandal. So I don't know. Like, it just didn't make sense for them to leave him alive, because he would just point out the names of his assailants. Okay, the next theory is actually very, very interesting. It is a theory about a brain tumor. So this theory comes long after Poe has been dead. 26 after he was buried in an unmarked grave, the city of Baltimore wanted to give him a proper burial. I don't know why I can't speak today. Well, you will have to live with that. Maybe because... Never mind. Never mind. I shouldn't finish that sentence. Never mind. Okay, so... 26 years after he was buried in an unmarked grave, for some fucking reason, I don't know, since he was a celebrity, I don't understand why he would be buried in an unmarked grave for 26 years. Can someone explain? Okay, so then the city of Baltimore wanted to give him a proper burial with a monument to go with it. And there was a whole other story about that. They would like mess up the headstone, put the wrong date of birth. Instead of like January 20th, they put January 19th, or the other way around. I forgot. But it was basically a hot mess. So, okay, but part of this reburial required the excavation of Poe's body. And when they dug him up, the coffin was in arguably decent shape. However, Poe's body was in a drastically worse state, so much so that when moving the body, the skull fell off and fell back into the grave. Allegedly, one of the excavators, one of the workers, went back to retrieve the skull. He heard some rattling sound, as if an object was rolling inside the skull, like hard kind of object was rolling inside of the skull. And papers would say it was Poe's dried brain, which turned small over the years, but that is not what happens with the brain. It doesn't end up, it doesn't end up that hard if it's just like, if it dries out. So then pathologists were asked for an opinion years later, and they theorized that it could have been a calcified brain tumor because, a tumor could, it is calcified, it does calcify. So the tumor could have led to Poe's adverse effects to alcohol and eventually his death. But as far as we know, the body was never excavated again. And if the tumor theory is true, well, this tumor would still be inside of that skull. But, on the flip side, there are some arguments against this theory. Basically, one is that the worker who supposedly heard the rattling of an object inside Poe's skull only came forward with this story like 3 years after the alleged incident. So why did you wait 3 years? Like, why would you wait so long? Notably, the skull was reported to be degraded more than any other part of his body. So the skull was like more, even more kind of in worse shape, including missing teeth. So maybe the teeth fell out of their place and they would fall inside of the skull. And that's what was making the rattling sound. Basically his teeth, like the dirt, the teeth, debris and whatever. Like it felt like it happens. Like even dirt, some like hardened kind of pieces of dirt, they end up in a skull. That's what happens. And they could make that sound. All in all, the theory awaits evidence, and the only way to know is to basically excavate Edgar Allan Poe's remains back up for another autopsy. We still have a couple of theories. Okay. The next theory is pretty straightforward too. So, suicide. Poe was actually known as a depressed person, to the point where it became somewhat a stereotype that anything Poe related was dark and depressed. It is rumored that he had tried to kill himself once before, after his wife's death, so after Virginia's death. However, this was a very dark time in his life that greatly disturbed him. The Poe before his death was a very different person in a different place in life. He was engaged, that was like right before his death. He was engaged. His writing career, so he was engaged to Elmira. His writing career finally took off after The Raven, and some said he was really hopeful for the future. So it just didn't seem like a person who would just, take their own life. Many historians and biographers highly doubt the suicide theory, and the testing of his hair samples so far ruled out any like toxic substances that he may have taken, or even the alcohol, rendering it unlikely that he had ingested any poison in an attempt to end his life. But the tests are not perfect, and they have blind spots, which brings me to the next theory, which is poison, disease, etc., any other thing. So there are more possibilities and speculations that actually you know, they don't have facts. They don't have like, what was the word? I was looking for the right word. So they are not supported by any facts. They're just like basically speculations. Substances like mercury and lead were speculated to have affected Edgar Allan Poe's death. But again, the testing samples didn't show any of those, you know, substances in his body, or at least no lethal levels of those substances. On the other hand, illness like the flu, pneumonia, or tuberculosis, which, by the way, killed Poe's wife, or epilepsy or syphilis and more, are also considered. But I mean, in the 1800s, it wasn't very, it wasn't unlikely for a person to die of the flu, or it wasn't unlikely for a person to die of, tuberculosis or something. But again, from what we know, he didn't really display the exact symptoms of any of those. Well, at least not from the story we know, because unfortunately, again, the missing medical records. And those are the only thing that could shed some more accurate light on Edgar's state in his final days. But again, missing, we don't know, we don't have them. Okay, and this is the last theory that actually was provided by Kanta. This is like his personal theory that hasn't really been thrown around or mentioned in the articles. Poe was actually known to be a gambler early in his life, which I mentioned because he left, the university when he kind of like gathered too much debt, gambling debt, and he was out of money. Not much is known about his gambling habits later on after college, but it's not unlikely that he, kind of regained this habit. So what if Poe gambled on the side just for fun? Not to a concerning degree like before, but still, like just here and there he would gamble. And then on his trip from Richmond to New York City, he had been swindled. As he got engrossed in a game, he gained too much debt, and maybe he gambled away all of his good clothes, all of his possessions, and with the little money that he did have, he got like those ill-fitting, ragged clothes that he was found wearing later. Then he ended up stranded in Baltimore with no money to continue his trip. There comes the anger at himself for falling back into the gambling addiction and losing all the money, which maybe triggered a depressed mindset and maybe the need to drink and forget. Or maybe in his depressed distress, clearly bad shape, he met someone who offered him alcohol as a comfort, and that would lead him to get drunk and get to that state on October 3rd. He may have also ended up in Baltimore in search for his friend, Dr. Snodgrass, whom he wanted to get financial aid from. Like, if he had fallen into that gambling addiction, he was broke. He couldn't travel. Okay, he knows that, my friend, Dr. Snodgrass, it's a terrible name, but Dr. Snodgrass is in Baltimore. I'm just gonna go there and I'm gonna get help from him. So that's why Snodgrass was the person Poe first asked to be contacted when Walker found him and when Walker was trying to help him. And this would also be why he never said anything about how he ended up the way he did, because of shame. So he was ashamed. He was embarrassed that he had fallen back into the gambling. He had gotten drunk. He was in this terrible state. Maybe it also ties to the Cooping gang theory. Maybe Poe was broke because of his own doing, so he gambled it away. He was broke. He needed money. And then when, the Cooping gang kind of approached him and maybe offered him some money in exchange for that voting operation. But yeah, there is no actual evidence to support this theory. Just the same as all the others, it's more of a, what if. And there is little to no way to find out what really happened to Edgar Allan Poe that day. And there's also no information about those few days before October 3rd when he was off the radar. Was it alcoholism that ran in Poe's family that had finally dipped its claws in the poet? Was it an illegal cooping operation that the writer got entangled in and ended up being murdered? Or perhaps it's an underlying condition that only the missing medical records could explain. These and more questions persist, but to this day, the case of Edgar Allan Poe remains unsolved. Okay, I'm fucking tired. My throat is busted. Oh my lord. Okay, wait, let me... Why do I sound like so weird when I say oh my lord? Okay, let me just have a sip of water because like my throat is on fire. Oh yeah, the other guy, well, whatever his name was, like Evangelist Walsh. I don't know. They lacked, for one, they lacked a lot of there was a lack of names other than John and Joseph. That's the real problem of this story. That's the real issue of the 1800s. That's the real mystery. Like, did you guys not have any other names? Yeah, wait. Kanta says, it hurt so much, but yeah, we basically really know maybe 3 things about his death. When he was found, where, and that he's in fact dead. Yeah, pretty much. Like, I just wonder, like, where did the medical records, like, disappear to? Because it seemed like they disappeared. They went missing, like, very quickly. Like, no one really had the records from day one for some reason. And then, yeah, and then they just like, okay, everyone agreed, like, oh yeah, the records are missing, we're never gonna find them, never mind. A death certificate, it's okay. So Sona wants a sword cane for Christmas. Yes, I want a sword cane. Oh my god, I'm gonna be so cool. I want to be cool too. Okay, again, thank you so much, Kanta, for helping me out with this case. And aside from that, I just wanted to thank all of my patrons. Wait, let me show you guys. Let me show you guys the patrons. Yeah. Okay, here are the patrons. You guys, thank you so much for the continuous support of my channel, and I hope you enjoy the cases that are about to be published. Well, I mean, the cases to come, the cases on Patreon. There's a lot. And another one is coming on, tomorrow. Tomorrow. Another one is going to be tomorrow, and it's just going to be the case of Jeanette De Palma. Also an unsolved death of Jeanette De Palma. And the stream is going to be likely... Well, for now, it is scheduled for 7 p.m. Pacific time. I might move it to 7:30, but I will obviously keep you posted. And... well, you probably have seen the little sneak peek that I posted of my new 3.0 Sona model, VTuber model, that I'm gonna release. Well, I mean, I'm gonna show it in the Patreon stream. So for the public, it was just a little sneak peek. For Patrons, you guys are gonna see the whole thing. I don't think it's gonna be like 100% finished yet. But I am excited to show you guys like what it looks like so far. And yeah, I hope you like it. Okay. Sona, we should sell Sona branded canes. And swords as a bonus. Oh my god. One day, yes, I'm totally doing that. I'm so doing that. But yeah, so tomorrow you guys will see the new design, the new model. I'm excited. I have to, yeah, probably won't be finished yet. But you know, like I wanna show it to you guys. I was excited. I was going to show it today, but then I decided to move it a day, and yeah, it's likely I still need some time to finish it up. But I hope you guys enjoyed this stream. If you did, please do share the video, subscribe, like the video, because it helps this channel tremendously. You know, I hope you guys liked it. I hope you guys liked it. I hope you guys, you know, enjoyed hearing about this case. And it's gonna make you wonder about Edgar Allan Poe's death. Alrighty, next week. What is next week? Okay, next week I might take a week off. I will do... I don't know. I might. I haven't decided yet. I might move the Harry Houdini case to the second week of November. I might need a week of like just to work on the model and just to like a mental break because I've been like draining myself a lot. But that's it. That's it. I will let you know. Okay. So stay safe out there. Stop naming your John. Okay. Stay safe out there. Always lock your doors and windows. Bury your hexes. Please, for the love of Jesus Christ, don't name your kids John and Joseph all the time. Like, there are other names. You have no excuse. I mean, beautiful names, John, Joseph, beautiful names, but like, we have enough. It's okay. Just name them something else. Okay. Until the next time. Bye.